Texas Governor Greg Abbott has signed the infamous Death Star bill into law. I'm John Cooper from Counterpoint Politics, and I'm joined by my co-host, Desmond Price of the Independent Thought Podcast, and our special guest, Connor Hallblide, former congressional candidate from Kentucky. We'll be discussing what the Death Star bill is, what it means for the people of Texas, and what it means for the country at large here on the left wing. So basically, this bill bars localities from passing certain laws if they contradict state law. Specifically, this legislation mandates that state law supersedes local regulations, including ones already in effect, if the local rules involve agriculture, business and commerce, finance, insurance, labor, local government, natural resources, occupations, or property, which is basically everything. Some of the local laws that could be negated by this bill include mandatory breaks for construction workers in Austin and Dallas, which has been a real big issue lately because of a spate of heat-related deaths that these laws were aimed to prevent that are looking like they're just going to happen now because of the Death Star bill. Also, things that this could overturn are housing protections related to evictions that localities pass are no longer going to be able to protect people, as well as regulations meant to discourage predatory lending. All of these are going to be eviscerated by this Death Star bill. That's the reason for the name of the Death Star bill. It essentially gives the Texas government the ability to blow up anything that it wants. And the extra kind of important context for this is that in recent months, Texas Republicans have authorized a lot of power grabs, essentially, effectively to erode Democratic control, and specifically erode left-wing Democratic control, to make sure that that Republicans are in control of local laws, even if those localities haven't elected them. For example, in March, Abbott's Republican administration announced that the state was taking control of Houston's public schools. And in May, the GOP-controlled Texas legislature passed a pair of bills that effectively place much of the elections process in Harris County, which includes much of the densely populated and liberally in Houston, under state control. So it is very obvious, what this bill can do for the state of Texas. If you live in a liberal area of Texas, it probably won't be that way much longer if state Republicans are able to use this in the way that they clearly want to. So questions here to you, Desmond, Connor. One, is this something that we should be concerned about if we're not living in Texas? Two, what do you think, really should be done on this kind of state versus local control question?
The hypocrisy is something that I cannot get over. I can't get over it, because let me just break this down for you why I feel this way. Republicans are constantly railing against the federal government, saying that they don't want federal oversight for X or for Y or for Z because the states know better than the federal government how they should be dictating the goings on within their borders. Like Texas knows better than DC about how to govern Texas, and Kansas knows better than DC how to govern Kansas, and Florida knows better than DC how to govern Florida. The philosophy behind that is that the people within those boundaries have a better idea about what the community needs than some far off kind of bureaucracy. And now you're basically taking that exact same mentality and flipping it on its head and saying, actually, we here at the state capitol know better than you in your own little city. And so we're going to usurp your ability to actually, pass the laws you want to pass and to govern yourself the way you want to. They are directly conflicting their own ideology in real time, which tells me that their ideology was built on nothing but bullshit in the first place. You can't actually be for people governing themselves if you're not going to let people govern themselves. It's complete nonsense. So what I see here is a power grab. What I see here is politicians who feel as though their state might be slipping away from them and trying to do whatever it is that they can in order to prevent that slipping away. Like taking a broader stance back and looking at Texas from a whole national view. You actually be worried about this happening in other places? The answer is yes, because our politics are becoming more and more national. And I think this is a nationally based move. because Texas is the stronghold for the Republican Party. If it ever flips blue, they're never going to win another election nationally. They know that. And so they're trying to do everything they feasibly can to make sure that this state never turns blue. How do you do that? You make sure that any kind of progressive policy that might be able to be passed on a local level cannot be passed. You make sure that ideologies that you might not like in the school systems, they can't be enforced. You're doing everything that you can to make sure that Texas remains red because of the domino effect that it will have nationwide. And I think it should be something that we should be very much paying attention to, because if this type of thing happens in Texas, which it already has, unfortunately, but if it continues to domino, Texas won't be the last state that will put in something like this. It'll just be the first. And I think it'll have repercussions for people all over the country.
Yeah, I think that this is very scary, and it will affect everyone across the U.S., but it'll especially affect certain states like Texas, states like Kentucky, states I believe like Montana, which are red states, but with some very dense pockets of blue. Those are the states that I believe are going to be really affected by something like this. So it will affect everyone, but certain states will be affected tremendously by decisions like this. As far as why this occurred, this just comes back to the founding of the country, really. I mean, this is federalism at its finest. We like to think that there are three levels of government, but in reality, there are two levels of government. There's the federal level and the state level. Local laws and local ordinances, local control is one that is granted by the states at their discretion. For the longest time, localities have been able to exert some form of control or some form of power. We saw a lot of that in the 60s counterculture era all the way up to today. But that can be revoked kind of at any time. Now, Texas will not be able to do everything that they want with this with this law. I mean, in reality, those cities do have a lot of power, even if this law is in place, and they'll be able to exert some control. But the reality is that this is the system and how the system is designed. This is one of those problems that is built into the structure of the Constitution. So it's going to be difficult to combat this on a national level, but this is one of the reasons that we both have to focus on very specific laws, which I believe it's important to focus on, fighting against specific laws we don't like, but also, which I think the leftist view is, fighting against the system that we live under, because this occurs because of the system that this country lives under.
We discussed during the Andrew Tate segment this week that a lot of times these grifters online take a kernel of truth and expand it into something that is untrue. And because people believe the true thing, they will therefore believe the untrue things. And I think that this is a great example of that being used to affect policy, because essentially what the Texas government is doing is saying, hey, these liberal cities are out of control, going after your kids with their gender ideology, and we need to make sure that these kids are safe, or whatever. Like, that is that little tiny thing that, I don't think is true, but like you can say is a reasonable argument to some people. And they use that to break down all of the ideological stances that you just mentioned, Desmond. They use that to completely go over the local control, the conservative idea of small government. And we are going to pass this big government thing to destroy, the libs who are attacking our children. And I do really think that, like, if you're a conservative listening to us right now and you think about this for 2 seconds, there is no way it aligns with your ideology of small government to have the state government be able to override local laws protecting workers from heat waves. Even from a just logistical standpoint, that doesn't make sense, because Texas is a very big state, and Texas has very different climates and environments based on where you live in Texas. So it makes a lot of sense to have local laws governing exactly how these things work when it comes to work environments, because Southern Texas is an incredibly different environment than Northern Texas. And it doesn't make sense to place those things under state control. And I'm saying that as someone on the left, right? But that kind of leads me into my next question here. looking at this Death Star bill, ideologically, is this not something that we ask for on the left sometimes? Like when it comes to housing, do we not ask for, state override of local housing laws? Is that not something the left advocates for constantly? Don't we want the federal government, the state government, to step in and grant workers more rights with a big sledgehammer as opposed to a scalpel? And this is a genuine question. I'm not even asking this rhetorically, because it's something that I've really been struggling with myself, is like, what if the Death Star was used for good? Isn't that something that we kind of want over here? And if you disagree with that, why not?
It is a true philosophical question, because you're asking it in the reverse, right? Like, what if this was a government that you agreed with trying to take away the abilities of cities that you didn't agree with from imposing laws that you didn't like? So you're saying, like, maybe if you're in California and there's a city that is more Republican leaning who is stripping workers of their rights, and that's just laws they have on the books in that city in California, but then the state,
or not even Republican leaning, just a local homeowners association stopping construction of new housing.
There you go.
Who's to say the state has the right to tell them they need to build more housing around them? How is that ideologically different? And I've been really struggling with it, to be perfectly honest.
Right. I think for me, my first thoughts around the story was the hypocrisy of it, because not more or less just taking a stance, but like, how do I feel about this? But thinking about the fact that Republicans openly state that this is how they feel about government, that they want that, they want the decentralization of government, essentially, that there's more local control over their lives. And so to see this happening in the Republican stronghold of Texas, it definitely just makes me just very curious, and also makes me want to call out the hypocrisy of it. But if you're asking me specifically, it is very conflicting. Truthfully speaking, it is very conflicting, because I think with the idea that in some cases it can be used for good, in other cases it can be used for bad, it leaves me with the idea that maybe, I don't know, John. I think you got me stumped on this one. I think you actually have me stumped, like, right here in real time. I'm gonna come out and just say that I think that local governments should have more control over this than the states do. And regardless of the fact, because I think the slippery slope can just be a little too much at the end of the day. Because I think if something is truthfully bad in a community, it takes less organizational effort to change what would happen in that local community by the people who live in that city, if they really want things to change, than it would take in order for that to happen at the state level. So I think if something was truly nefarious, it has a better chance of being offset locally anyway. So it probably is better for it to stay in local hands. I think that's the stance I'm going to have in real time here.
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and I think it's a question that anyone who's on the left does need to wrestle with. I am of the opinion that this, looking at things from a systemic point of view, that the system we live under is always going to favor conservatives, and in today's world, Republicans, when it comes to these kind of laws than it would people on the left. So I think that, because I don't think you have as many super red cities or super red population centers in blue states. I just don't see it as what the left should be focusing on. I think if the left's vision or North Star is protecting workers or protecting people who can't help themselves, I think that's a better way of going about it. And maybe something like, I'm of the opinion that we should get rid of the electoral college, because I don't think land votes. I think people vote. And so, that's what I think, that we on the left should be pursuing more policies that allow more people to vote, and not property. And on the left, we're free to say sometimes federal law is good, sometimes state laws is the way to go, sometimes local laws go. We don't have a single. We're not bound by this idea of the right that we're all about local, we're all about states' rights. It's because we know that that's bullshit. Like we've seen here, we know that they don't really care about that. So I think I think it's it's enticing, but I think on the left we need to understand that the system is in place to where we may have some benefit in one time, but it works against us, and we should be pursuing policies where more people have decision-making opportunities, and whether that's federal, state, or local, we can choose any of them.
It is, a nuanced question, and I definitely would challenge our audience to ask this of themselves, because it isn't as simple as Republican bad, Democrat good in this case, because I think California, Desmond, is a wonderful example of there are many liberal people in California who make very, very bad decisions on a local level that affect the state level. And I think that when if we're going to provide a legitimate answer to this question, I do think it has to come down to the scope of this bill, and the areas it allows state control over is the problem. I think that when you add rights to little people, that's something the state should be able to do. And then localities should be able to add more, but they shouldn't be able to get rid of them. And that can't be put into a policy, what I just said. But I do think that should be the philosophical, ideological basis of policies that are put in place. And, politicians should have to defend them as such. However, I do think that there is a non-zero chance that this Death Star bill explodes in the faces of the empire, as it did in the movie. But because what we saw, I believe we talked about it before, there was like a law, I forget where exactly, which state it was, but there was a law that stopped Republicans from doing what they wanted in terms of, I think it was like something with vaccines, because they passed it in order to kind of get at Obamacare, and there is precedent. I forget exactly what it was. I don't know if you remember exactly the story, Desmond. We'll pop it up in the description of the video for those who are interested. But yeah, like I think that there is a chance that this bites them in the ass, because there are demographic issues for Republicans in Texas that are kind of unsolvable. That is, it's eventually going to turn blue, and it's only a matter of time. And this could very well, be used against them. But Connor, what you just mentioned with the Electoral College, with state, I think states in general are dumb. It's stupid we have them. It's stupid that 300 years ago we had states, and we have to abide by the fact that we have to give each other different voting power based on the state that we lived in, because of people who have been long dead decided it had to be that way. I think it's another one of those massive hypocrisies of, if you value democracy and you think that all men are created equal, how come we don't have equal votes? Doesn't make any sense. Land doesn't vote. States are dumb. There's no logical reasoning behind the drawing of the states. And we should really just redraw them, because they don't fucking matter. They're just local governments, in my opinion.
I think that's great, John. It shows that, there's contradictions within the system. And it's kind of up to us to both point out those contradictions and say that, like you said, look, we don't have to live in a world that we were born into. We have the opportunity to change the world in the way that we want. And we on the left, I think, are just of the opinion that, we want people who are affected by decisions to be the one who are making the decisions. And, maybe 250 years ago, it meant a certain policy or a certain structure. We could argue about that. Historians tend to do that. But we can also say, look, we are under no obligation to keep a system in place that is actively hurting people. There are very few natural laws out there, gravity being one of them. Other than that, we can kind of change what we need to.
To wrap this up, if you guys would be interested in Connor coming back on and talking more about the Electoral College, the Senate, why we might want to get rid of it, let us know in the comments, and we can maybe make an evergreen video about that.